Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Later in the show, I'm going to speak with State Senator Janne Myrdal. She's the sponsor of legislation which just passed the House. It passed the Senate earlier this year. It passed the House this week, and now it goes to Governor Doug Burgum for signature. But essentially what it does is it, first of all, defines critical infrastructure, things like pipelines and that, and then creates some new, some new enforcement, some new crimes for, and not just tampering or impeding the repair of or impeding the construction of that sort of infrastructure, but also any organization, it sets a fine for any organization that might, aid and abet that sort of thing, which I think is important. It's become a political tactic. Some of these, left-wing organizations, they recruit, what are frankly zealots to use as cannon fodder to commit acts of violence, acts of vandalism against things like pipelines or pipeline construction projects or what have you. And, the organizations end up getting away scot-free. So the legislation passed. The ACLU is saying it's treating it like it's some affront to free speech. But the last time I checked, vandalism, trespass, things like that, not protected speech. Anyway, you can listen to that full interview coming up. But before we get there, can we talk for a moment about privilege? So I'm sure you've all been following the Jussie Smollett situation out of Chicago. Essentially, the actor was not acquitted. The prosecutors dropped all the charges. There are conflicting reports at this point, but basically Jussie Smollett and his lawyers are claiming that he was exonerated. The prosecutor saying, well, not so much. We cut a deal with him. He forfeited his bond, and we agreed not to go further with the charges. So they're not saying that they exonerated him. Meanwhile, the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, is, pushing back, and he calls the whole thing a, quote, whitewash. The head of the Chicago Police Department, also standing right by the mayor's side, saying they're not pleased with the outcome of this either. And I guess we can all have our opinions about that. I look at the situation, and I think it's pretty clear that, to me, based on what I know, in my personal opinion, it sure looks to me like that guy staged a hate crime against himself. Now, what's interesting about that is typically we like to talk a lot about privilege here in the United States. And, the idea is that, rich people have privilege, and certainly Jussie Smollett's a rich person, but then also that, white people have privilege, and, white males specifically have privilege. And those are the terms in which we talk about, right? We identify everybody as groups. We don't treat them as individuals. We identify everybody as groups. We lump them into groups, and then we treat them. We pretend as though, they have all the traits of that group. So that way, if you're a white male, then you have privilege, right? If you're not a white male, if you're a gay African-American man like Jussie Smollett is, then you don't have privilege. And it doesn't matter who you are as an individual. None of your individual character traits or accomplishments or life story or anything like that. None of that matters. It's just the fact that you belong to one group or another is what defines you, right? That's identity politics. That's the woke culture that we're living in today. And so Jussie Smollett, in a lot of ways, in the eyes of a lot of people, is automatically a victim, no matter what. He checks off the right demographic boxes, therefore he cannot possibly be anything but a victim. He cannot possibly have privilege in the eyes of some. Now, the problem in that is Jussie Smollett's an individual. Yes, he's a gay black man, and yes, historically, those demographic groups, gay men, black men, well, they've not been treated so kindly, historically speaking. But again, that's the problem with treating people like groups. Jussie Smollett is an individual. Jussie Smollett is Jussie Smollett. And whatever else historically may be true, his life experiences, his actions, his character is unique to him, not to anybody else. And so what's interesting is, and again, this is my opinion, I think he staged the whole thing. The evidence was compelling. The local law enforcement was very transparent in the evidence they had against this guy. his story just doesn't stack up. I think it is my personal opinion that the whole thing was a hoax. I think Jussie Smollett staged the actions against him. That's reality. I think that's how I see it. That's how I'm looking at it. Now, I realize he hasn't been convicted in a court of law, but as I look at it, that's my opinion. That's the conclusion that I've reached based on the evidence that I see. I think he's guilty of that. And I think based on that, I think it's kind of funny. Or not funny. I shouldn't say it's funny. I think it's maybe telling. I don't know. I don't know the right word for it. Interesting, maybe. That Jussie Smollett had to, for whatever his motivations were, and I guess there's been a lot imputed to it, that he wanted to, maybe career-wise, he thought that being a victim would elevate his career. Supposedly he didn't like the way Fox, the folks who produce the show that he was on, Empire, which I've never seen. I don't really know anything about the show, but apparently he'd received some hate mail, and he didn't think it got enough attention, or he didn't think it was handled appropriately. So anyway, in order to make himself a victim, he had to stage something, right? And nothing apparently had actually happened to him to make him a victim, or at least not to make him enough of a victim. And so he had to stage something to turn himself into that victim and to grab that, what do you want to call it? The cachet that victimhood status gives to him. In order to grab it, he had to manufacture it out of thin air, in my opinion. That's what it looked like. That's what it continues to look like. And so now he got caught doing it, and there's going to be a lot of partisan reactions to this on one side or the other, although not necessarily. I mean, Rahm Emanuel, who, by the way, worked in the Obama administration, is certainly a Democrat through and through. He's certainly not on Jussie Smollett, so maybe it's not fair for me to call this partisan, maybe ideological. I don't know. I don't know what to say it, but I think there's some who are going to defend Jussie Smollett because they're woke and he checks off the right demographic boxes to be a victim, therefore he can't possibly be anything but a victim. I think they're going to back his side no matter what, but the prosecutor's office basically let him off the hook. And so now we're in a situation where not only is a man who checks all the right demographic boxes to be a victim had to basically, again, in my opinion, had to manufacture his own victimhood. When the legal consequences come knocking, right, when the possibility for him being held accountable for this in a court of law comes happening, he gets let off the hook. Which is typically the sort of thing that's only supposed to happen to people with privilege. White people. Males. Straight males. But yet Jussie Smollett got privilege because, in a certain faction of society, because of his status as a gay black man, that maybe gives him privilege. That privilege being that he can't possibly be anything but a victim, right? That's privilege too. Oh, and he's rich, and he has connections, including a former member of the Obama administration who, by the way, reached out to local prosecutors. The communications with the local prosecutor resulted in the local prosecutor having to recuse herself from the case. That's privilege, right? I mean, we should all be lucky to have, a member of a former presidential administration reach out and try to, pull the strings for us on an impending criminal prosecution. That's privilege. Jussie Smollett had privilege, right? He was privileged. He snaked his way out of this. He did something wrong, again, in my opinion, based on the facts. Your mileage may vary, but the facts that I'm looking at sure looks to me like he cooked up his own hate crime. And then he got caught doing it, and then he got off the hook. He has privilege. And I say that, and I'm not basing it on anything other than who he is, Jussie Smollett. I'm not basing it on his race. I'm not basing it on his sexual orientation, and I'm not basing it on his gender or any other demographic. I'm basing it on Jussie Smollett, the individual who has a lot of money, who is a celebrity, who has certain political inclinations, all of which grant him privilege. See, I think that this is an important concept in our society. And I talk about it before. It's a theme of these podcasts and my writings because I think it's important. We have got to stop treating each other like members of groups. The groups that Jussie Smollett belongs to shouldn't matter. In fact, the whole concept. I mean, what he tried to manufacture, again, in my opinion, what he tried to manufacture was a hate crime. And even the concept of hate crimes, I think, should be offensive to us in a way, as though crimes against certain races or certain demographics of society are somehow worse than crimes against another, right? I mean, to me, a crime is a crime. If you get assaulted on the street, like Jussie Smollett claimed that he was, if you get assaulted on the street, that's an assault. Full stop. Nothing else really matters. You were assaulted, you were robbed, you were raped, you were murdered. I mean, all of those things are too true, and all of those things are terrible, terrible crimes, and it doesn't really matter. Your identity shouldn't really matter in any of that. Just as your identity shouldn't really matter in terms of judging who you are. Right? Your skin color shouldn't matter, and your sexual orientation shouldn't matter, and your gender shouldn't really matter. These are all parts of what make you you, but you're also a unique person. You're also a product of a unique set of circumstances. You're a product of your own decisions. You're a product of your own upbringing. I mean, you're unique. Not all of us have privilege, right? Not all of us, but a lot of us do. And yes, history has organized us in some ways because of past bigotries, and even bigotries that extend into current times have organized us socially and organized us economically, and that's not great, and we're still struggling to overcome a lot of that. But I think a big step towards overcoming a lot of it lays in ending this trend, or I don't even want to call it a trend. What do we want to call it? This habit of assuming we know a lot about each other because of those things. If you look at an African-American man and you assume that that person was raised in a ghetto by a single mother, dodging drug dealers on the way to and from school, well, I think that would be presumptuous, right? You're stereotyping. That's a little racist. You shouldn't do that. But it's equally true to look at maybe a white male and assume that person was born with a silver spoon in their mouth and born with privilege. You don't know that person's story. Maybe they were born into privilege. Or maybe they were born poor to drug-addicted parents. You know, and maybe they didn't get to graduate from high school. I mean, you don't know anything about that person. That person is an individual. I hope that's the lesson. I don't think we're going to take this lesson from Jussie Smollett, but if there's a silver lining to it, I would hope that lesson gets through. Jussie Smollett is a person of privilege. Jussie Smollett is a victim who had to manufacture, again, in my opinion, his own victimhood. Jussie Smollett is somebody who got off from the criminal charges from, again, in my opinion, manufacturing his own hate crime because he has privilege. Even though, again, if we stick to the strictures of identity politics, he doesn't have privilege. Well, yes, he does, and what happened in Chicago proves it. My interview with Senator Myrdal, up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. State Senator Janne Myrdal joins me now. She's a Republican, and she is the sponsor behind Senate Bill 2044. Now, it passed the state Senate earlier this year, and then just recently passed the North Dakota House of Representatives, meaning that it is heading towards the desk of Governor Doug Burgum. Well, I guess I can ask Senator Myrdal if you're on with me now. Is Governor Burgum, has he given any indication one way or the other if he's going to sign this?
No, you know what? He tends to, Rob, not to give any indication really until he has it on his desk. Late yesterday, almost evening, I talked to his office, and they indicated they didn't see any reason for him to veto this. I think it probably had more support than any bill that's gone through our session this time, frankly, Rob. The rooms were filled on both Senate and House side with most entities that would be concerned about this safety bill. So I I cannot foresee that he would not sign it.
So the bill in question is, like I said, it's Senate Bill 2044. And what it does is it clarifies law. First of all, it provides a new definition for critical infrastructure, which is things like pipelines, things like power lines, basically the stuff that keeps the lights on, keeps the heat on, important stuff. It defines critical infrastructure and then provides for penalties for individuals who, vandalize that infrastructure or impede its construction or repair. And then it also contains a provision whereby organizations which aid or abet individuals doing those sorts of things, engaging in that sort of criminal conduct, where they can be held liable as well. And so this passed. Janne, why did we need this bill?
Well, I tell you what it came from, Rob, was in Pembina County, which is my district up in the northeastern corner. In 2016, we had two actors, and I don't mean Hollywood, two actors came in with the intent to shut down and do damage to an oil pump station in my district. Now, they were prosecuted. One got off, the other one got a year. I think he may have served as much as 6 months. And he actually was interviewed yesterday and said, I would do it again, even if you charge me $1 million because I'm saving the earth kind of thing. So that's where it came from. Law enforcement in my district felt like there was not enough teeth in the law, felt frustrated with this whole issue. And so that's literally where the process started. Now, I know some of the opponents, Rob, have said, it started with ALEC, it started with other states, it started with the oil companies contacting you. That is categorically absolutely incorrect. It was something I became aware of about 1.5 years ago, and I went to legislative council, then certainly got advice from some of the states that have gone through this, my colleagues in other states, and we massaged this language for, I would say, about 8 to 10 months before session started to make sure it was a North Dakota bill, and even amended it several times before it actually came before the Senate committee. So just wanted to have those infrastructures. And by the way, just to mention those infrastructures, Rob, there's infrastructures in North Dakota that would, if damaged or destroyed, would cause tens of thousands of people harm in North Dakota. And that's why it was a great concern to me.
Well, not just in North Dakota either. I mean, the region. I mean, the pipelines are, the Dakota Access Pipeline, for instance, goes across several states. I mean, most of these pipelines, they're not just serving North Dakota. In fact, they're taking all the stuff that we produce here in North Dakota and moving it to other parts of the country where it serves, I think overall, I mean, you could probably say North Dakota's keeping the lights on, or in other ways serving millions of people. So it's
yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Another point was that I had my testimony, and I don't have it before me now, but some of the definitions in there too are literally out of the Homeland Security's definitions of what is literally national security to protect not just our economy, but our people and our infrastructure in the United States. Because like you said, it does spread, and we export electricity too. So it affects, and several other states are looking at this same legislation now. So it's a good bill.
It's funny to me that people are trying to say that this was, somehow inspired by the oil industry or whatever. I mean, agree with the bill or not, the reason to ask the public policy question is manifest in North Dakota. I mean, we had the Dakota Access Pipelines as a primary example. Yeah. They've become sort of this avatar for left-wing anti-oil activism. So you had that, and then you had, the quote-unquote valve turners, who you referred to, who are breaking into pipeline facilities and fiddling with the valves, which, by the way, creates a danger for leaks, creates a danger for potential explosions. I mean, that's not a small thing that they're doing. And by the way, they were inspired. I mean, they were declaring solidarity with the Dakota Access Pipeline protesters. So, again, whether you agree with the bill or not, the motivation for introducing it and asking this question and saying, hey, is this something we want to do in response to these things? I mean, those things happened right here in North Dakota. We're not responding to some hypothetical. These are real actions that have been taken by real people in North Dakota. Oh. And you're reforming the law to maybe, bring a little bit more accountability to those situations.
Well, absolutely, Rob. And that's why we're here, right? I mean, I take this job very seriously, and certainly I reached out to other organizations because you want the most wisdom, the best language, and legislative council went through it literally dozens of hours to make it good. And the other criticism is that it shuts down freedom of speech. And Rob, you know me. If there's anybody out there that defends the freedom of speech. I certainly do. I'm passionate about that, and I can't tell you how many times I said you cannot touch that. But to come in and to break and destroy, and with intent to destroy and break property, is not freedom of speech. And so, as far as how dangerous it is, remember, was it like 2-3 months ago, whatever, in Mexico? There was a bunch of people and they weren't tampering. They were actually tampering in order to get oil or get gas for energy, right? And I don't recall, it was 169 people got killed. These are dangerous things to do. And as far as tampering with pipelines, why on earth would you want to do that? Because you're going to have oil spills that actually then will destroy the environment. So to me, it makes no common sense at all, the opposition.
Now, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, has come out, and they've been opposing your legislation since it was introduced. What they said in a statement upon the occasion of the House of Representatives passing it is essentially that here we go. They're saying that it is an anti-protest legislation which, quote, will punish association, violate freedom of assembly, and almost certainly stifle protected speech. Their statement continued, at best, this bill is entirely unnecessary. At worst, it is meant to chill speech. Existing law already prohibits trespass and malicious destruction of property and conspiracies to commit the same. Now, what's your response to that criticism?
Well, my first response is, on the Senate side, they opposed the language, the original language that did talk about co-conspirators. So I went to legislative management and we amended that. And actually, privately, after the House hearing, even though they still opposed it, they actually came to me privately in the room and said, we really like the new language of the bill. We still oppose it, but we like that language. So we addressed their concerns. But no, there isn't anything sufficiently in Century Code right now, Rob, that would do what this bill does. So you have the actor coming in, and we put the penalties there for the actor. But we also know nationwide, and certainly here with other issues that we've had here in the state with these things, that they are funded. They're literally funded by people sitting, in New York, California, you name it, whatever. So if we can find what this bill says, if you fly 10 people into North Dakota with the intent to damage and destroy critical infrastructures that are defined in this bill, we're going to punish you, certainly. But if we can convict, a funder or a co-conspirator that actually paid for you to come in and do so, we're going after them too. And the basis of law, Rob, and you know this well, is a deterrent, right? These are deterrents. So obviously, the actor that did this in Pembina County, he was interviewed apparently yesterday. He said, "I don't give a rip what your law is." And go, well, then you're actually making my point, But there's going to be consequences. That's what law says. We're going to protect North Dakota's infrastructure. We're going to protect the people in North Dakota without even touching the freedom of speech. Of course, you can still go. It actually even specifically says in the bill that this does not touch the freedom of speech, freedom to assembly, freedom to do anything whatsoever that is peaceful assembly whatsoever. And so I think they're in committee too. All their arguments were defeated in the debate in committee. So I think it's just kind of a blank stand that they take without looking reasonably upon the legislation.
Let me just drill down on that. I mean, because I think most people understand. I mean, vandalism is illegal, right? I mean, the guy who turned the valve, the guy that you're talking about, who was, I don't want to use his name because I don't want him to have any more publicity than he's already getting. Good. But he was already convicted of a crime. Yeah. So I think some people are out there saying, well, these things are already illegal. What's the point of your bill? And just playing devil's advocate, if vandalism and trespass and all those things are already illegal, why do we need your bill?
We need it because we're seeing nationwide, and again, I go back to Homeland Security, who also saw that. We're seeing nationwide a new trend of these actors being actually paid or funded by organizations and individuals in order to come and do destruction in our state, right? And so I'm looking at North Dakota, I'm going, no. Heck no, we're not going to have that. Yes, we have punishment. They need to be stricter. They need to be more, instead of just a slap on the hand, you get a $1,000 fine. No, you could have done something that could have cost enormous amount of destruction. I know in Pembina County, it was over, actually it was several $1 million of destruction because they shut it off and stopped that whole pipeline for a long time. So the proportionality wasn't there, number one. Number two, my goal is say to those outside of state actors that can just sit comfortably in a chair with your fat cigar and pay people or fund people or make sure funding gets to people to come here and do such thing, need to equally be held responsible if we can convict them in court. Right now, they don't care about those actors they send in. Rob, they don't care about any of them. We saw that during DAPL. They don't care about that. But these are national efforts. We're seeing in other states now further down south where they're actually now suspending themselves over railroad tracks in kind of bungee things that can cause a train to literally derail. These things are not freedom of speech. They are not small things. They have massive effect on infrastructure, and we need to have teeth in the law to go after it.
Well, I think that's an important distinction. I know that I am not, and I am pretty certain, Janne, that you're not either, in favor of doing anything that's going to stop somebody's ability to say, "Hey, I don't like that pipeline," or to rally and march in some lawful, safe way, and hold up signs and scream and shout and engage in profanities, I guess, if that's how they want to express themselves, or any of the other stuff that they want to do, and say, we don't like that pipeline, and lobby against it, and write letters to the editor against it, and post videos about it, and be on social media about it. You don't want to stop any of that. I don't want to stop any of that. That's free speech. You and I may disagree with them, but they're allowed to do all of those things. What they are not allowed to do is put people in danger. What they are not allowed to do is go on other people's property without permission. What they're not allowed to do is vandalize or destroy property.
Well, it would be the same as if, you know me, I'm an activist, and I still, have a heart for, let's say, the pro-life issue. I stand outside the Fargo abortion facility and I pray. Now, if I pick up a rock and I smash the window down and go in and start beating up all their machinery, that's not freedom of speech.
Or even if you enter the building and start harassing people and refuse to leave when you're asked to leave, well, yeah, Janne, if you did that, you should be arrested and charged with the appropriate crimes, and because you shouldn't be allowed to do that. You disagree with it, but abortion's legal in this country. They're doing something legal. You're out there having your fair say, but you're not allowed to block people, and you're not allowed. And that's the thing that I don't understand. The ACLU would absolutely, if pro-life demonstrators were blocking people from getting into an abortion clinic, or going into the abortion clinic and vandalizing the equipment so it doesn't work, or mucking about with the equipment so the doctors can't perform their abortions, the ACLU would absolutely be in favor of you being prosecuted for that. But for some reason, if you break into a pipeline facility and vandalize the valves, or if you try to block construction workers from getting to a pipeline to repair it or to build it or what have you, suddenly you're on the side of the angels and you have First Amendment protections. I don't understand that at all.
Well, I think it becomes political, Rob, and it's a money fundraiser issue. And, this issue is a huge political issue and a big movement now with the Green Deal, all those things. And it's a big fundraiser, too. So you got to kind of follow the money a little bit where these groups stand. I mean, that's just reality.
It's sad, though. It's sad. It's sad to see an organization like the ACLU doing this. I mean, this is the organization that once defended the right of white supremacists to have a rally in Skokie, Illinois. And they were right to. I know. Because as much as I certainly don't make common cause with white supremacists. I have little love for their ideology and their worldview, but they have the same First Amendment rights that I do, and their speech shouldn't be suppressed, and the ACLU defended them, and good on the ACLU, but now these days it seems like they're sort of picking and choosing where they're going to take a stand on the First Amendment, depending on whether or not they liked the content of the speech, and, well, that's not right.
That's a dangerous road to go down, and it's a dangerous road no matter how we mess with a First Amendment. It's a dangerous road. We all have equal rights, and you're perfectly right. And if people protest the pipelines, good on them. If they climb over and start shutting them down and blowing them up, not so much.
I agree. Senator Myrdal, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. Hey, can I ask you a favor? If you're listening to this on a platform that allows you to rate or review the podcast, something like iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, would you leave an honest rating and review? I'd sure appreciate it. Also, we should be available on pretty much any platform out there. If you're having trouble listening to the podcast in any way, please email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. Also, follow me on Twitter, if you would, @RobPort. Follow me on Facebook. Just search for Rob Port. Say Anything Blog has accounts on Facebook and Twitter, too. You could follow me that way. And also, if you want to send in questions for our weekly guests, Senator Kevin Cramer, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, they're on every week to take your questions. If you send your questions in, I will ask them. You can email them to rob@sayanythingblog.com. as well. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.